Hello, everybody. So this week, this session will be in English. We're very happy that there are so many people here, even though there is so much stuff happening everywhere around the world. And I mean, elections and terror attacks, and we hope that everybody is fine, and also lockdowns. And we're happy. I'm very happy to present Cristina today. She is going to, she's a regisseur, I don't know how to pronounce this correctly in English. She makes movies about peaceful protest against nuclear weapons. We did send you a link for watching the movie and lots of additional material. And we're very happy to have Cristina here today to talk with us about nuclear weapons, about the threat that they pose. And we're very happy that she also got us for wonderful speakers, which she will now introduce. And yeah, I'm happy that she's here. And let's start with this week's session.
Okay, thank you. Hello, also from my side, a warm welcome to today's lectures about nonviolent resistance for a world without nuclear weapons. I'm very, very happy to have these 4 guests here that I'll introduce in a second. But first of all, I want to say thank you for the organizers of these lectures, as I think it's such an important, yes.
One more thing I would like to add is that the chat is for now closed, and we will open it when the discussion opens. This is to not, because the chat was distracting for some people during the last sessions, so we will just open it during the discussions time.
Yes, so I was saying thank you especially to the organizers of and also Studierende gegen Rüstungsforschung for organizing this lecture series to put attention to a topic which is widely not heard or very little perceived. So and putting attention to war and war weapon industry, but also to allies like universities can sometimes be in this preparations for war. So we will talk in English. Your question can be addressed also in German, obviously. Also ihr könnt eure Fragen auch gerne auf Deutsch stellen im Chat dann später. And yes, but yes, what I'll introduce our four guests, and we will hear about their about the commitment against nuclear weapons, and their situation in their respective country. So I'll start with Marion Küpker from Germany. She's part of the organization Gewaltfreier Atomwaffen abschaffen, which received the Aachener Friedenspreis last year. And since years she has been campaigning for the role of the US nuclear bombs stored in Büchel in Germany at the military base there. Susan Crane is from the US. She's an anti-war activist and also a war tax refuser. She lives in California with homeless people and has been also campaigning against her country's war policy since several decades, I think, and spent also a couple of years in prison because of her protest. Susan was part of, was amongst those 5 activists who entered the naval base, which you saw, for those who saw the movie, yes, that was one of those five people, so you may recognize her. Then we have Nadia Schmidt from from Austria, normally based in Vienna. She co-founded the Austrian branch of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, ICAN, shortly known as ICAN, in 2012, which is an international coalition of NGOs, which got the Nobel Peace Prize 2017. And last one, I'm especially happy because it was very spontaneous that I asked her, and she said yes, she would join us. So it's also from the US, Leona Morgan, and Dene, and who grew up in the Navajo Nation. She's been fighting nuclear colonialism since 2017. She'll explain us what that means. She co-founded Dene No Nukes to address especially uranium mining, and been part of a lot of other campaigns to abolish nuclear weapons. So this is my short introduction. You will have the time to introduce yourself also. My first question is especially Manuel already said, I'm a filmmaker and following people who are fighting against nuclear weapons, and for me it was first 4 years ago that I started engaging in that topic because of the film, and I have very little, I know not that much people in my generation who are involved or dealing with this topic. So my question would be, there's so many things in this world to fight for, or as Greta Thunberg says, that the house is on fire, our house is on fire, and actually we have a lot of houses on fire. She's referring to the climate crisis, but we will be talking about nuclear weapons today. So why did you decide to engage in this topic against nuclear weapons, and why do you see the special need for this? So you can be very tell your personal story. So I don't know, we'll start maybe with Leona. Do you want to start? We can't hear you. Maybe we switch to Marion. Yes, okay. We go to Marion, okay?
Yeah. First of all, about my introduction. Actually, I received the Aachener Peace Prize for the German-wide campaign Büchel is Everywhere, which is a nuclear weapon space, nuclear weapon free now, and this campaign around more than Germany. A is one group I'm with, which joins as part of the campaign, and I'm also representing or working for Fellowship of Reconciliation here in Germany. So the question was, what made me going? Actually, it was in the 80s, the same situation as with Fridays for Future. I was a young person, 16, and I got aware of nuclear testing, the nuclear waste, which is being dumped into the oceans, and learning that radiation is going to be there forever and it's very dangerous. So, and nuclear weapons already actually kill before they are going to be used in the whole production circle, even by uranium mining and so on. And this was that time more important or more seen as the danger of the climate change today. Today I would consider both as equally important. Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you, and thank you for clarifying your So let's switch to Susan.
So I come from the only country that has used nuclear weapons, dropped them on human flesh, made children, adults, families vaporize, leaving only shadows, caused extreme pain with skin falling off, caused people to die of thirst, then the rain was poison, caused people that might have lived long enough to get to a hospital be alive with maggots eating their flesh still. The images that are forever etched in my mind of what my country did are horrendous. That's mass murder. But yet, in this country, it's taught in the schools, and many people still believe that it was necessary. It was a moral good. It saved American lives. It's a war crime. It was a war crime. Truman was a war criminal. In fact, all the presidents since him have been war criminals too. But that's not talked about. And that's not taught in the schools. And it's very hard in this country to have a conversation about that because people are so convinced still this dying empire is somehow the moral high ground. It's astounding. It's like someone's in a family, you can't talk about abortion, or you can't talk about someone with mental illness or addictions or things get avoided in families. It's like the United States is this huge dysfunctional family that cannot have a sane conversation about war making and nuclear weapons. And in part, it's for economic reasons because every state has a part of the war making. It's spread out through all the states. And the economy is so tied up with nuclear products and war making that people are afraid to talk about disarmament. And meanwhile, it's threatening terror. We terrorize the world with our weapons. And in their production, as Leona will tell you, it just causes death after death. That's why I'm against them.
Thank you, Susan. Then, we'll talk more about this also financial part later. But Leona, now you're here. Okay, yes, it's up to you.
Okay. Thank you for having me. Leona Morgan I am here as a Diné person. I started working first on uranium mining. I grew up on the Navajo reservation. In the United States, indigenous peoples are still here. There's over 570 indigenous nations in the country. My people have the largest area of land, and our reservation, I think the comparison is about the size of Ireland. I'll check on that, but our land was mined for uranium, and this was before there were laws to protect the environment and the water and people, workers or residents. And my family lives where I grew up. There's no mining, but my relatives, my family, and people all over the Navajo Nation everybody knows somebody who has had a cancer, or maybe their relatives worked in the mines. The mining stopped about in the 80s, but there has been no cleanup. There's been no comprehensive health studies. There's a little bit of cleanup in some places. I can talk more about that. It's not a good quality cleanup. And so today, there are still many people getting sick. And listening to what Susan said about the acute exposure to radiation, for us, it's the opposite. It's long-term, low-level radiation that is resulting in health problems today. A recent health study showed that there is more uranium in the urine of Diné people than most people in the country. And in the study, they also found urine in babies And so this is happening today, even though the mining stopped over 40 years ago So this is my life's work, because my family has been hurt by uranium. And in New Mexico, we have 2 nuclear weapons facilities. We have many, many sites in New Mexico. And I can talk a lot more about each of the sites and a lot of the work that the organization I represent. We're fighting right now nuclear waste dumps. So these are dumps that are storage for waste from all of the nuclear power plants in the United States. So I've done a lot of work on uranium mining, and right now my focus is a little bit more on the waste from the nuclear energy side. But I can talk more about what's happening at Los Alamos and in New Mexico. So thank you for having me here today.
Thank you, Yurena. Yeah, we'll come definitely back to that later. So Nadia is missing to introduce yourself or why you got engaged in this topic. Nadia?
Yeah, well, I studied political science in Austria, and in Austria, most people are more focused on nuclear energy than they are on nuclear weapons, because they say we're a neutral country, we don't possess nuclear weapons. What can we do about it, or what should we do about it? And for me, it was always very challenging from a political scientist view. Is like, why are these weapons of mass destructions not prohibited? Why are they legal? And why is there no clear ruling on that? Because clearly the use of it would be against existing humanitarian law. So this was like one of these topics that occupied my mind a lot during my studies and all that. And Vienna is also the seat of the IEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, and also there are the preparation conference for the NPT taking place every 5 years in Vienna. And there's been one in 2007 where the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons was founded, or had like this founding conference in Vienna. And I visited it and got into this nuclear development movement for the first time. And after some time, I think it was in 2012, some study colleagues and friends, we realized that this initiative that is starting and building up a momentum within ICANN has a lot of potential for Austrians. And because Austria is a neutral country, and as not having nuclear weapons and having in its constitution this nuclear-free status, we could push our country and our government forward to support us, like the civil society and international organizations that were working for the total elimination of nuclear weapons, that Austria could play a role and that we could push Austria forward that they do it. And that's why we founded a specific Austrian chapter of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. Yeah, and I think that's the story about how I came into this topic.
Great, thank you. And you'll have a lot to tell us a bit later about what was happening the last weeks. And yes, but first of all, well, my next question, to give a bit of an idea who possesses nuclear weapons, are and yes, to give. I would like to ask you, like especially maybe now, Susan Crane, how many weapons does the US possess? How much do they spend on this? Can you tell us?
Well, the US has about 5,800 nuclear weapons. That's an astounding number, and it's a complete waste of money. But anyway, about 2,000 are deployed, and about 2,000 are held in reserve, and about 2,000 are awaiting dismantlement, but they still could be used. They could be brought up and used. Of the weapons that are deployed, there's about 400 that are in the ground, these in missile silos throughout the farmland, throughout the Midwest. There's about 900 on submarine-launched ballistic missiles that are on mostly Trident submarines that are roaming the oceans, and no one knows where they are, but within 20 minutes, one of those can be launched and hit anywhere on the Earth. There's about 300 that are on bomber bases in the U.S., and then there's 150 nuclear weapons from the U.S. that are in Europe. And the U.S. is the only country that has their own nuclear weapons on other countries' land, and of course that's against all sorts of treaties. The nuclear weapons are illegal just in themselves, but to give them to another country is illegal also. So the present administration is asking for $44.5 billion next year. Now, this is for the Department of Defense and the Department of Energy for the nuclear weapons. In the U.S., the Department of Energy owns the nuclear weapons. You would think the Department of Energy would be dealing with solar and things like that, but no, it's the nuclear weapons. That's such an amazing amount of money. It's hard to even imagine what that means. But in general, half of the federal tax dollars that people pay when they pay their federal tax, about half of that goes for war making, and a good portion of that goes for nuclear weapons. You know, when I was teaching school, I was teaching percents, and I'd make a big, pie, and okay, about half goes, 50% goes for war making, past wars, paying the debt on past wars and present wars and planning. And how much do you think goes for education? And the kids would guess all sorts of numbers, 3%. It's so outrageous. Anyway, that's a quick and a summary of how many weapons we have and what they cost.
Sorry, I was unmuted and talking. It's true. It's really hard to imagine how much money that is, but in percent, that's crazy. Only 3% going to education. So, well, you were mentioning that there's the U.S. is the only state having their nuclear weapons in other countries, and one of them is Germany. I mean, amongst Turkey, Netherlands, Belgium, and Italy. So we'll go to Marion now to ask about the situation in Germany, because, yes, to give a brief summary on how many nuclear weapons do you have on German ground, and why?
Okay, so the countries, the European countries you just mentioned, they all together combined have about 160 to 180 nuclear weapons. It's the B-61 bombs. They are from the United States, and they are deployed in Europe. It's being called under NATO nuclear sharing. So 20 of them are in Büchel, of these B-61 bombs. And they have about an average of the explosive power, each one 10 times the bomb on Hiroshima. And the situation is that at the German army base, in Germany, there are German planes, the Tornado, and a German pilot who would have to fly these bombs into their targets if they get the order through NATO by the US president, so right now by Trump actually. So, and on the base is also US personnel. They will hand over these bombs. These bombs are illegal under international law. This whole nuclear sharing inside NATO is illegal under existing laws. But still, the countries are doing it. It's kind of power and burden sharing. They're doing NATO exercises. They train nuclear war, even close to the Russian border. And we know this now since about 20 years. So we are protesting at the base to get rid of these bombs and to get rid of NATO nuclear sharing. Is this okay for now?
And what is the population like? There's a current discussion in about those weapons, like a quite recent discussion. Could you give a brief summary of discussion in politics, but also say what does the population think about it? Because I know many Germans who don't know that there are weapons, nuclear weapons in Germany, and I don't know how many of the students knew that. Yeah.
Right. The situation is that it had always been kept secret that we have these nuclear bombs in Germany. But because of our campaign, we made it public over the last 20 years, and we have even recent polls. They say that most of the Germans, between 80 and sometimes above 90% of the Germans, they don't want these nuclear weapons inside Germany. They want to get rid of them. And since we have lobbied a lot, since 2010, it was the first time that all parties admitted that we have nuclear weapons in Germany. They also decided on, they wanted to negotiate to get rid of them inside NATO, but negotiating in consensus. And right now, I would say the situation is most want to get rid of them. And our government actually is one of all NATO countries who have not ratified who have not even signed the TPNW, so the treaty which is about the prohibition of nuclear weapons. And that's so our campaign is working on lobby work, and the second thing is we want to get rid of these nuclear bombs. So we have since 4 years always 20 weeks of actions, including civil disobedience at the base in Germany. And the third demand is that we don't want a modernization or uprising of these bombs. Because right now we are in a situation that the United States plans to build new bombs, the B-6112, the model is already ready, and we are opposing it together even with our US activist friends. And for these new bombs, our government is even planning to buy new planes, fighter planes, which is the A-18 from the United States. From Boeing is doing this one, and it all shall cost, they plan to buy about 44 planes just for the nuclear weapons. And here's also a link towards the climate crisis, because when we look at it, then just 1 hour, flight hour with the existing tornado already means 12 tons. It releases 12 tons of CO2. And last year, for example, there was a big party at the Büchel base because they were celebrating their 200,000 since their existence of flying these tornadoes around just for the nuclear bombs. So it's amazing. It's 2.5 million CO2 they have just dumped next to the chemicals they release as well. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for giving this overview on the situation in Germany. Nadja, I think you want to add something.
Yeah, I wanted to add 2 things. One is which might be of interest to the Austrian students that are participating here, that on the north of Austria, like Büchel is the next place or nearest place to Austria where nuclear weapons are stationed, but then also the second one, which is of really deep interest to Austria, which is Aviano. It's in Italy, where quite a couple of nuclear weapons are also stationed, US nuclear weapons. And it's just, I'm now in Carinthia at my family's place, and when I look out of the window, it's just like 60 kilometers straight down. And the Austrian, the ZAMK, the Zentralanstalt für Meteorologie und Geodynamik, has released a study. It was a study in 2014 where they showed numbers and like what happens if just one weapon accidentally explodes there, what consequences the Austrians will have. And we needed also this study to show Austrians that there is an immediate risk, but also like that Austria needs to do something about it because it's very near in the neighborhood. And maybe I don't know if any other one of the speakers like to talk about like the global, like how many countries have nuclear weapons, but maybe I can.
Yes, go for it.
Brief overview. Currently, in 2020, we have 9 nuclear weapon states. And this number is growing since the beginning. Although since the 60s, we have one international treaty, which is called the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which exists that it hinders the proliferation of nuclear weapons. The interesting thing is that when this treaty was negotiated, 5 countries have already tested nuclear weapons, and these 5 countries are coincidentally also UN Security Council members with veto power, but it has nothing to do with the NPT and having nuclear weapons. And actually this treaty writes down that all the countries, all other world countries that join the NPT, and actually only 4 have not. You can guess which 4 have not joined this treaty. So all countries that join this treaty, they will never acquire, produce nuclear weapons. And the 5 that had nuclear weapons by then, and they signed this treaty in promising the others that they will disarm in due faith. This was in 1963. At the end, like in the 80s, we had at a certain point more than 60,000 nuclear weapons on the Earth. So, okay, we had a good development. Now in 2020, we have only 15,000, although we noticed that a handful could destroy quite a lot of humans around the globe if we think about nuclear winter and other consequences, humanitarian and environmental consequences. So still, like these 5 countries developed or like expanded into 9 countries they currently have, which shows that this treaty did not really hinder proliferation. But the worst thing about all this is that those 5 countries that are allowed to have nuclear weapons according to this treaty did not disarm. And instead, because we heard about the modernization money that the US is spending, all 9 nations that have nuclear weapons are right now modernizing their arsenals. And ICANN has made a study which is called Enough is Enough on global nuclear weapon spending. And it was about the figures in 2019. And just in 1 year, those 9 countries spent $79 billion on their nuclear arsenals and their modernization. And if we just count it, what does it mean per minute? It would be $100,699,000 in a minute. And this in a time where we know that we have, in a lot of countries, serious health problems and that the systems do not have enough capacity to provide security and human security to people. We have a new arms race where more and more countries are investing it and investing more money and modernize their arsenals, which is clearly not allowed according to the treaty all have signed in the 60s.
Thank you, Nadia, for giving those clarifications and very important details about the situation in the world and who's possessing these weapons. I have another question for you, but I think I'll first switch to Leona and then I'll come back to you. Leona, I would like to ask you to share more of your activism and what you like, especially mentioning that most of us think public awareness that the first bomb, for example, nuclear bomb, was the bomb on Hiroshima, but actually the first one was on the Navajo land, a nuclear test. So I would like to ask you to tell us more about this nuclear test, which are mainly done. Well, I think there have been about 2,000 tests since 45, and most of it done on indigenous land. So could you tell us a bit more about this?
Sure. So in the United States, the first nuclear test was on July 16th, 1945, about 5:30 in the morning. And it was actually on the lands of the Mescalero Apache and Comanche and other indigenous people in southern New Mexico. This was a test that they put the weapon 100 feet. They put it on a platform 100 feet. What is that, like maybe 30 meters above ground? And it exploded from a high place that allowed the fallout to go further, and the fallout went east all over the United States. And this was not really known about. There was no warning to the community, and in this region, there's a lot of people who were using the land to farm, and people had cows, and there's many stories about the impacts from the first weapons test called Trinity. And right now, today, there is a community organization that is still fighting for United States recognition of this, of the effects to the people there. Under the United States law called the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, the United States gives some money to families who were hurt by nuclear weapons tests, and also uranium workers. This is a law that provides some money for health care as well as lost lives, but it does not include people who were impacted from the Trinity test. And it only helps uranium workers who worked after 1971. The law is set to expire in 2022, yet many people have still not been compensated for the impacts to their lives. And as you mentioned, the nuclear weapons testing in the United States was mostly on Western Shoshone lands. These are indigenous people in Nevada. So most of that testing, again, the fallout went east and covered the United States. And there were over 900 tests that were done in the United States on the Western Shoshone. And again, this is not very well known. Earlier, I mentioned the uranium mining. So this is an issue I know more about because I focused a lot on fighting uranium mining, a new mine specifically. But the need in the United States is to clean up all of the mines, because before 1971, the United States was the only purchaser of uranium. So uranium mining was happening all over mostly in the West. I have a picture I can share if someone can help me share the picture. I had issues earlier, so maybe I can try to do this.
Yes, we will share it.
Okay, so there's a picture that I wanted to show. These red, the red marks in the middle of the country are where the uranium mining occurred. And so my people are from New Mexico. New Mexico is in the southwest, and New Mexico is where there's a lot of weapons production. But in the early days of uranium mining, you see where the dark red, the bright red color is, and then some of the a little bit more like pink. These are the places where uranium came out of the ground, mostly for weapons. And so during the boom of the 1950s to the 1970s, there was a lot of uranium mining. And like I said, it was the only entity purchasing the uranium was the United States government, and it was all for weapons. It left over 15,000 abandoned uranium mines across the country, and there's no fund, there's no law to clean up these uranium mines, and it was for weapons. The pink dots you see, mostly in the East Coast, these are nuclear power plants. And so this is a map we use because earlier I mentioned we're fighting 2 nuclear waste dump proposals, which are in the Southwest, in New Mexico and Texas. And so you can see the work that I do is mostly to fight environmental racism. And we see this as a form of racism, that the impacts were largely to indigenous communities in the West, yet the use of the uranium, either for weapons or electricity, went somewhere else. And so those who, I guess you could say, they benefited from the electricity are not really where the uranium came from, because there's no nuclear power plants in the same places where the uranium was taken out. So the uranium was taken out of the ground and went all over the world for different uses. After 1971, before 1971, it was all for weapons, and now, decades later, the parts of the country where they have nuclear power plants, those power plants are getting old, and many of them are scheduled to shut down soon. They try to, continue the nuclear power through life extension, but they are all old, and eventually all of them will be shut down. And the high level radioactive waste at all of the power plants, there's nowhere to put it. And so right now, this is the biggest fight that I am working on, is to stop the proposal to bring the waste to New Mexico. And so the idea is to build a waste dump in New Mexico for double the amount of waste that exists in the United States. And so you can see from the map that they took the uranium out of the ground, it went somewhere else, but now they want to bring this waste back to us. And many of those communities where there are nuclear power plants, they don't want this waste. Yet some of them are helping to say we should be responsible for the waste and keep the waste. There's no place in the United States for the waste, and something that needs to be known, especially for people that are not familiar with nuclear issues, is the connection between nuclear energy and nuclear weapons. I know many people are celebrating the UN treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, but I think, and it's a great thing. It's a wonderful thing, the movement and the work that has gone into this United Nations treaty. But it's very imperative that people know that nuclear energy is not a solution to climate change. It's called low carbon, yet, as Marion said earlier, the radioactive waste is there for a very long time, and people live near these places. And so we need to stop producing nuclear energy just the same as we need to stop nuclear weapons. Both, uranium is used for both, and around the world, it's indigenous peoples who are affected mostly by the production of uranium. And so I just wanted to share the map and some of the information. And so it's not only necessary to stop weapons, but we also have to stop using nuclear energy and figure out what to do with the waste. Thank you.
Thank you, Leona. I will ask you some more questions later to that ecological consequences. And but let me, because you just mentioned it, the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which a couple of weeks was ratified or had his 50th ratification that it needed to be put into force. So I would like to ask Nadia, because you or ICANN is very active in that. To put it into force. So I for those who don't know about the treaty, could you shortly give us tell us what it means? This 50th ratification, and what do you think will be its consequences? That's a big question, and I want to tell us that we have the chat open for question now, so there can come questions from the students now. But Nadia, go for if you want to give an answer.
Okay, so the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. I would always use the short version TPNW, as it's kind of a tongue breaker, I think. The idea behind it was that it's quite difficult, or nothing is happening in United Nations forums or state forums that exist to negotiate disarmament treaties. So there is one UN body which is based in Geneva, which has the task to negotiate disarmament treaties. And the last one was the CTBT, the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, and this was in 1996. And since then, diplomats meet every year, a couple of months, to discuss what is the next step, kind of. They just discuss Tagesordnung, but they don't do anything because the states can play vetoes and they hinder themselves. And when ICANN was founded, the idea was to build up a large group of civil society organization that is working together with international organization and with like-minded states, we call them progressive states, to build up a momentum based on a new conception what security is, like human security, that you always need to discuss about humanitarian consequences, and then from then on starts diplomatic processes and discourses. And it's like nuclear weapons have never been, so there's a ban on chemical weapons, there's a ban on biological weapons, a ban on landmines, on cluster munitions, and like the last weapon of mass destruction never had like this explicit prohibition treaty in place. So there is like an NPT, but it does not explicitly prohibit it. And then there is a case, a law case in at the International Court of Justice that says that it would be unlawful to use them. But our intention was to ban them and not to discuss that. Certain states discuss what is the next step. And if I go down 500, you also go down 500. And then we make like step by step. And at a certain point, we will have a world free of nuclear weapons. Our idea was to immediately start or immediately ban nuclear weapons. And it was clear that those that possess nuclear weapons, they don't like this and they would not participate. The idea for us behind was that the effects, they do not respect borders, they do not respect anything. So everyone should have a say in it, and no one should be able to hinder such a process. And those countries that were most engaged in this process, and we had over the course of 10 years, a lot of statements in the United Nations General Assembly and at different conferences, and there were always between 120 and 155 countries supporting this humanitarian initiative approach, which was, in our opinion, the majority of states. And then we convinced like states to put resolutions. In the end, in 2017, there were negotiations at the United Nations in New York for this treaty, which was voted by 122 states in favor. And this now prohibits everything, like the production, the stationing, the transport, and the use, like the whole range. But it also has, for the first time in an international treaty, victim rights. That also, like from the international basis, when that victims can claim the rights, even if the bombs were tested by another nation in there. And the rule in this treaty is that 50 states need to ratify it, meaning to bring it in national laws. And when we have 50, it automatically enters into force in 90 days. This will be on January 23rd. And then we will have this clear prohibition, which says nuclear weapons are inhumane and are illegal, and that everyone should follow it.
Great. Thank you. Yes, and I'm sorry to have told you to. Yeah, but yes, great. I mean, we could talk. We should talk much longer about this. But I'm very happy that there's a few new questions from the students, and I will read them first and then go on with my questions, but I want to give them the possibility to ask. So I will be reading the questions because I'm not sure, do you get the questions? Yes, okay. So Susan, I guess you have read the question to you. So I would like to, yes.
I don't know how to read them. I don't know. I don't see them.
Okay, no problem. I will ask. I will read it to you. So there's a question to you, saying entering a high security complex like Y12 could have very well resulted in guards using the guns, as they are probably authorized to use lethal force. So my question: where did you take the courage from to enter the complex? What made you confident that the guards will give you the opportunity to answer questions instead of making use of their guns immediately?
I wish I could read the question, but it's the weapons are where the weapons are being deployed or where they're being built is a crime scene, and it's one of the many crime scenes in this country, and you know, as has been talked about, these weapons are illegal if they're ever used. They're indiscriminate. They don't, and they kill everybody. And if they're used, and as Leona was saying, even if they're not used just in the mining and production, they kill people. So
I think it was especially. Yes, like a personal question. How did you deal with the guard, knowing that the guards might be shooting?
Well, when we go into a shoot, when I've gone into a shoot to kill zone, we have banners. We are nonviolent. We make it known that we are nonviolent activists, and it's turned out that the people who find us first know that already. They know that they see our big banners, and they know who we are. When we go to trial, they pretend they didn't know and they were afraid, and we might have been shot or they might have been shot, all sorts of things. But you know, when you're living in this country, you feel very complicit with what's going on. And for me, I think, how do I show that I'm not complicit with this war-making government? I don't agree with it. I can say, oh, I'm not going to pay my tax. I'm going to take the tax part that goes for war and not pay it. Sure, I can do that. And there's a cost to that, a cost to my kids. When they're growing up, we don't have any money. But it's not enough. And so what point does your conscience, you know, when you're in jail finally, well, I did what I could do. You know, it's like you have this burning need to do something that's the most imaginative you can. That seems like the best thing to do. And that's why we go into these shoot to kill zones. I don't know any other answer. If you talk to a 5-year-old child, they know these weapons don't make sense. They know it's not right to just kill a whole bunch of people. They know that. It's not a complicated story. And also they know that whatever their faith is, they're supposed to be kind to each other and love one another.
Okay, great. Thank you, Susan. And just to explain all of you, on the right, you can see there's a button where you can, on the right below, where you can open up the chat. Do you find it? And there you can read the questions. So just you have time to read them, and yes. So I would ask Leo. Oh, Marion wants to add something. Marion, you can go for it.
Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I want to add about Susan's go-in actions, because she had been also on the Büchel base quite a few times and also sitting on the bunkers there. Thank you, Susan. And we are having more than 100 people over the last years in different actions. They went onto the base. And we announced this beforehand to the army. They don't know when we go in, but they know that we are going to do it, and we are not just doing it for fun or not only for the publicity in the media. We are also doing it to bring attention in court to the international law, because international law is above our German law, and it has to be used by the courts, which they don't do. So we have complaints at the constitutional court right now. So we do all these steps through the courts, and when we are through, finally now we can decide on bringing it up to the humanitarian court in Strasbourg on humanitarian rights. And by this, if we're going to have success, because that hasn't been done so far, the last highest court here in Europe, then our government has to send these nuclear weapons back to the United States. So I just wanted to point out this. And maybe later on I can even answer to the Biden question and also the deterrence. Yeah.
Yes, I'm very happy. There are a lot of questions, so we'll try to go through them. Yes, maybe just we'll go for the next question, maybe in short. During the election, I mean, an important question because of today, how big of a topic were nuclear weapons during this campaign, and what's Biden's approach to it? Can you, whoever feels like?
Yeah. Okay, I say something to Biden. Biden actually promised, there's this last treaty we have, international treaty, the New START Treaty. And the New START Treaty officially runs out in February next year. And there's a possibility to prolong it. It's a treaty between Russia and the United States, which limits their nuclear carrier systems. So like for the nuclear cruise missiles, for the missiles, they only can have a certain amount, but already the nuclear industry is waiting to spend all this money for new nuclear weapons, so they need to get this treaty away. And Biden actually was saying that he wants to prolong for an extra year for Russia and the US to negotiate a new START treaty, which might include China and France and Great Britain, while Trump actually has not agreed on so far to prolong this treaty.
Great. Anything to add from our US citizens? Susan?
I wanted to bring up the Kings Bay plowshares. Maybe that's not connected. It's not connected to Biden, but is that okay?
Yeah, yes, in short, yes, of course.
Okay, so I hope you all know that the Kings Bay plowshares folks, it's been 2 years since they went on to the Trident base in Kings Bay, Georgia, to bring attention to the nuclear weapons that are there and to the Trident subs that roam the oceans with the nuclear weapons on them. And there are 7 folks, and 2 of them have been sentenced. Steve Kelly was just sentenced to 33 months and 3 years supervised release, and a whole lot of money that he's supposed to pay. Of course, he doesn't have any, so that probably won't happen. But the other folks are going to be sentenced maybe in November, or that might get put off. Liz McAllister was already sentenced, I think, pretty much to time served. And Steve's been in the Georgia lockup for well over 2 years. And now he's waiting transport up to Tacoma, Washington. But these folks, you know, it was a very good plowshares action that they did. And they should be thanked for doing it. And the judge would not listen to international law and national law that says these weapons are illegal. And the judge would not listen to their beliefs. They're all Catholic, and they brought forth a faith belief. And if doing something is founded in your faith, you're supposed to be able to do it, at least if you're on the right wing. But if you're left wing radicals, I guess it doesn't work. So anyway, I wanted to bring them up as it's an ongoing case.
Thank you, Susan. I just wanted to say that I shared their website, so you can have a look, and thank you for mentioning them, Susan. I think at least one of them is here with us today night. I saw her name. So yes, but Leona, go for it.
I just wanted to add, I didn't pay much attention to the debates, and with Trump's proposed budget, it's a huge amount going toward weapons. It's way more than we need, and it includes increased plutonium pit production, which is a big issue in New Mexico at Los Alamos. Los Alamos Labs is facing a proposal for huge expansions, and this is something, there are indigenous people living near there whose land was stolen for the Los Alamos to be built. And there's a lot of concern for the expansion. Of course, we don't want it, but this is something that's been budgeted for. And so yesterday was election day. We don't know how long it will take for the United States to know who will be the next president. This is a historic time in our country. As far as I know, it appears that Biden is a little bit more friendly to our causes to stop, so much nuclear weapons production. Of course, the United States, in my opinion, just as an individual, this is one of the greatest fights, is to get the United States to give up all of its weapons. The United States is they depend on their imperialism and oppression over the rest of the world to maintain their power. If we could take some of that money for weapons away and put it into cleanup of uranium mines, this would be amazing, but will never happen. So Biden is probably a little bit more friendly for our causes, but we can only, if he becomes president, we can only wait to see what he actually does. The same with Obama. I think there was a lot for Obama, but he also signed the nuclear modernization, which put into motion more money and technology going toward nuclear weapons. I follow nuclear energy more than the weapons fight, And so I know with both candidates, they are pushing for new nuclear energy development under the guise of, helping to stop climate change. And this is one of the biggest issues in the fight I have with fighting the nuclear waste proposals is nationally, the people working on these issues, they see, some hope for Biden to reduce the production of nuclear energy. However, it has been in his campaign to use nuclear as part of the solution to reduce carbon. And this is something that we hope will change over time. After he is elected, there will be a lot of organizations putting pressure on Biden on this issue of nuclear energy. But there was a question in the chat about how much of this was in the debates and how much of it was an election issue. Normally, in my memory, nuclear is not talked about enough during elections. It always needs to be brought up, and sometimes the focus is on weapons more than energy. But it's not a big issue in the United States. It needs to be, and so hopefully that will change. Thank you.
Thank you, Leona. Okay, Marion wants to add something. Afterwards, I wanted to go again for Leona, the question in the chat about the Trinity nuclear test. But let's listen first to what Marion wants to add, and then maybe you can give us a short answer on that, Leona. Marion.
I just want to say my opinion about nuclear deterrence. I think weapons which can't be used because of their terrible consequences, you can't deter with them. For example, there's computer simulation showing that only 10 of these nuclear weapons we have in Büchel would be enough if they would be used to create so much fire, because tests took place in the war in the Pacific on a desert, but when they're being used on cities and so on, then they create fires that for 10 years we would have a nuclear winter on the whole northern hemisphere. So that means we can't use them. And to imagine that right now in a situation where we have with the defense missile shield, we have only a few minutes warning, for example, with nuclear weapons in Turkey, in Germany, if they bring them closer to the Polish border, for example, which country can think clearly about it? We remember from the Cuban Missiles crisis, that the United States was really afraid it's too close to their borders. And yes, it's the time of thinking that something could happen, that they react wrong, is too short. So deterrence doesn't work. And these are finally the weapons where we believe they make it possible that we might be able to abolish war in general. That's what we hope, because when weapons get so big that they can't get used, that's the moment to have a turning point. And the second thing I wanted to say is about the opinion I was asked on the nuclear shipment right now, nuclear waste shipment in Germany. There's nuclear waste coming from the reprocessing plant in Sellafield, Great Britain, back to Germany. You just have to understand the background of it. Used fuel rods from nuclear power plants were sent in the past, long time ago, to the reprocessing plants in France and in Great Britain, because here we don't have them anymore. We never built them. The resistance was really strong here because reprocessing plants are actually plutonium fabrics. It needs used fuel rods from nuclear power plants to take out the plutonium, which gonna get concentrated for the nuclear bombs. So there is no civil nuclear use never had existed. It was always tight, connected. So in Sellafield, they took out the plutonium, and now they have to send back, because this had been agreed on before, the waste, the extra waste it produced. It's about 20 times as much than it was before, to Germany, even though we have not a solution where to put the waste, which Great Britain hasn't either. We still have the obligation, because officially this waste comes from here. We profited from it.
Okay, Leona. Leona, you want to give an answer to the question posed to you?
Sure. The question is if Indigenous people knew anything about the Trinity nuclear test, and did they notice it was taking place, and when did they get to know about it? So my nation is north of the Trinity test. We were not as impacted so much, maybe some fallout, but my community, the Navajo Nation, it's a few hours driving from the site, and so the people that were impacted, like I said earlier, were the Mescalero Apache and the other different Pueblo nations. So Indigenous people, not my people, but in general, people were not informed. Nobody, the general public they were not notified that this test would occur. People were asleep mostly because it was at 5:30 in the morning. And in the United States, the entire industry of, the Manhattan Project and the production of uranium, all of these things they took place mostly in secret. The whole infrastructure of the Manhattan Project was separated across the country. Parts of the different parts were in different places, and it was all by design to have it done in secret, where even the workers couldn't talk about these things with their families. And so many people all across the country were working in different places, in Tennessee, at Oak Ridge, and at Hanford, in Washington State, in Chicago, and then in New Mexico. But mostly the people were not. I mean, the scientists, of course, knew about the issues of radiation, but just like with the uranium mining, the general public, they were not informed of the dangers and the effects. Mostly these things happen because a lot of this occurred before there were laws for the protection of the environment. There was no consent by the communities. The communities were not informed, and the communities did not consent. The public did not say, yes, please test a nuclear weapon on our people. And so this is an issue today that we're still dealing with, is that the United States is moving forward with projects that we do not give permission for, yet somehow they are still pushing forward with more nuclear weapons and energy development. And in fact, Trump had been pushing for uranium to be considered a critical mineral, which gives it a more priority and restricting the public from giving input on the production of uranium. So these are all things that are happening today. In the past, I think a good example for the entire nuclear fuel chain is that the workers and the communities around these sites were not informed of the dangers, especially to their own personal health. And so today we're dealing with a lot of health effects, and this is the most important thing I know for my people, is the cancers and the different things happening today from the uranium production. And this is something we're very concerned about at Los Alamos and all of the places around the country, is the health impacts, because these are not paid for by the government to help the people. And of course, in the United States, we don't have healthcare like in other countries. Our healthcare system is, it's a mess. And so a lot of people are getting sick and a lot of people are dying because of the nuclear production, yet many people are still not aware of the different types of impacts for uranium. It's a toxic chemical poisoning because it's a heavy metal, but there's also the radioactive impacts. So the radiation that comes from uranium and plutonium and what's happening in the environment. For example, at Los Alamos, they want to release tritium into the environment. This is something that there's a meeting about it tomorrow. And I can put some information if anyone wants to join. Because of the coronavirus, all of these meetings are available to attend online. And this tritium release, they're not telling the public if it gets into the river and we use the river for our drinking water. The general population, I live in Albuquerque. Albuquerque is one of the largest cities in New Mexico. And the majority of people have no idea that this is happening. And so it's continuing today, but there is no information on the radio or the television about these releases. You have to go to the government website and you have to have some knowledge about what are the impacts. And so this is how these things continue today, is people don't want to know. It seems like people are pretty happy living their lives without the knowledge. And those of us who do know, we don't drink the water that comes out of the sink. We have to go get special water because we know that it's possible our water is going to be contaminated by plutonium that's released from Los Alamos, because they release it into the river and we use the river for drinking water. And we know that even with the best filtration, that it's possible for even small amounts of plutonium to come out in the public drinking water. So these are some of the things happening, and it's all the time, every day, and people just need to be more educated and to do something about it, which is not the case.
Thank you, Leona. Can you mute yourself? I'm hearing an echo. Yes, great. Okay, we are having a lot of questions. That's why we could offer to stay a bit longer, like for those who want, of course, to have some time to answer those questions. Nadia, did you receive the message which was addressed to you, and could you give a short answer?
Short. You mean why Europe tends to overlook the threat emanating from the nuclear weapons? My question would now be, what is meant with Europe? It's the European Union, or Europe just the states of Europe? Because the European Union doesn't really have power to act in all that. And we have the very strange situation in Europe that in the European Union, that we have neutral countries like Austria is, that are really opposing nuclear weapons and that are not part of an alliance like NATO. But actually most of the countries, saying like 24, are part of NATO and have their security relied on the NATO's nuclear weapons umbrella. In the Brexit negotiations, nuclear weapons have not been a topic, like in the negotiations themselves, but because Great Britain is leaving the European Union, a discussion started, also like in Germany, discussion started whether Europe should acquire a European deterrent, meaning like that Europe gets its own nuclear weapons, be it that we can use the French nuclear weapons as the European deterrent. And it's a very, very dangerous start if more and more politicians or from several parties start or open up this. So we have another proliferation issue. The second thing is that I do not understand why there was not such a big outcry in European countries. It was mainly in Germany, I guess. It was like the biggest one when the INF treaty collapsed, so to say. And this is a not so good development for Europe, because the INF treaty was very central for getting Europe out of this dangerous zone, because in Cold War, the nuclear war would have taken place on European soil. So the European countries were the first ones that would have been targeted. And the INF treaty was quite central to reduce the threat. And now we have lost this treaty, and then now maybe even next year the new start. So Europe has a precarious security situation. But it's not the question if we need a deterrent, because with this I would like to answer also to the deterrent question, because there's been also a clarification. Down there, it's like this mutually assured destruction. It is thought that when most world powers have an equal number of nuclear weapons, we have an equilibrium, and this creates security. And I would pose a counter question to, I don't know how it was formulated. Do you think that the people are, how can we trust the people that without nuclear weapons we won't start a third world war? I would pose the counter question asking like, why do people think that a deterrence works? Or because in my opinion, it's a theory that has never been proven right scientifically in numbers. It's assumed that and this also has to do which value is given to those bombs. We could get into like this value and very gendered and masculine approach, and like what nuclear weapons are equals power, that people think that because they exist, it provides security because all other people are afraid to start a war. I would say, first of all, there have been a lot of wars after Second World War. So it did not create a peaceful world. So I am not really sure which kind of war was deterred by the nuclear weapons. And especially when we look at Europe, where this Third World War might have taken place, or differently said that the first two world wars started within Europe, I would ask a question, doesn't maybe have the creation of the United Nations and the creation of the European Union had an effect in pacify and making like a more secure world in the European Union? And I, of course, I'm really think that in Europe we should discuss this more, because it's an imminent direct threat in the case of conflict, and there are a lot of stories out there how fast such a conflict can escalate and could escalate. And I really think that the starting point should be within Europe asking this question, what is a deterrent and why do people believe in it, and does it really deter conflicts and war situations?
Thank you, Marion. I'll give you the word in a second. I just want to pick out another question, and then I have a question that I would at least want to put in the room, and then we can see if there's time. There's somebody saying that there's currently a project in Turkey of a nuclear power plant construction, and asking the question, how can we stop this project, and how can we put public attention to it? So that's for that specific case in Turkey. But my reading this question, I would like to ask the question in general. The topic is so widely unknown, and also comparing to this climate justice movement, which is so quite strong in the media, at least, and I think also in politics right now. So how is it possible that there's so less attention to the topic, and how is it possible that there's so less connection to climate justice movements, because the ecological consequences are tremendous of nuclear weapons and all this uranium mining and so on. So would there be, like, he's asking how could we draw public attention? So I would add and say, could we show that with all that climate justice movement, which is drawing a lot of attention on a lot of topics, but not nuclear weapons. So how could we do a connection here? So that's a huge question. Beginning on the case in Turkey and general, but maybe there's some ideas why there's so less discussion about it. Marion, maybe you want to share your thoughts on what you wanted and maybe also on that.
Yeah, right. Okay, I go first back to the deterrence question. We don't have such a situation as mutual assured destruction, which actually mad, because accident occurred in the past and we were just lucky. Like computers got the signal that there were some nuclear rockets being launched, and there were military personnel who refused to press the button, even though they were ordered to do so, the red button. But anyway, we have the NATO nuclear doctrine, which includes the nuclear first use. For example, by the US, there are some parliamentarians are going against it. And also Trump changed 2 years ago even the NATO nuclear doctrine into having conventional wars where they want to use small nuclear weapons or smaller than the ones we are already having. That's the new B6112 is supposed to have a smaller warhead because they believe it works very nicely together. And so I leave it up to there. And now about Turkey. Let's say it this way. We have, since a long time, the Non-Proliferation Treaty and the conference. And this treaty, most countries are in it in the world. The conference takes place every 5 years. The next one is going to be next year in August, most likely, because of this year's corona situation. And the Non-Proliferation Treaty has a tricky article. It's Article 4, which gives the right to each non-nuclear weapon states who signs this treaty to achieve the civil nuclear power cycle by the nuclear power states. They don't need to know the technique, they just get it. And that's here the situation with Turkey. They get it from Russia as a nuclear power state. And we have to demand that the NPT, that this article also has to be abandoned, because nuclear energy is not a solution anymore for the future and is not a solution to climate change. We need renewable energy. And for this, this is also something, since you're coming from Vienna, the IAEO, the International Atomic Energy Agency organization in Vienna, they are actually supporting the civil use of nuclear reactors, and they are supporting this whole project in offering nuclear reactors towards a lot of Asian countries, Latin American countries, new nuclear reactors. That is new nuclear colonialism. And in this time today, it should be clear for everybody, with all the accidents we had already, like Chernobyl, like Fukushima and so on, and no solution with nuclear waste, that this, has to be stopped everywhere. And we have to go on with organizing civil resistance about these things, and knowledge too. It's not very well known. And there's another question too about how we can change, or if we wouldn't have international, what it would change in the international relations if we give up nuclear weapons. It's amazing. Right now, the world spends 1.7 trillion, it's about, US dollars every year on weapons, and 10% of it is for nuclear weapons. And this 10% is enough money which could be totally let into the climate crisis era and would save the problems we're having right now. Actually, we could change our world into a fair ecological economy, a fair trade economy. I mean, real fair trade, not what we're having now. So for the countries who have nuclear weapons already, they are anyway the strongest. They will still stay the strongest afterwards. But this money is needed somewhere else. Yep.
Okay, anyone else wants to add something to those questions being posed, like also on why okay, Susan. Yes, I can't hear you.
Well, I was just thinking that if we didn't have nuclear weapons, at least in this country, there might be enough money for good schools or for health care for people or for fixing the infrastructure or for there's extreme poverty. We made breakfast today for 40 people that are sleeping on cement, that are living in the bushes, that are at best living in an old broken down car. The poverty in this country, the lack of health care, the lack of education is astounding. I mean, we're spending all this money on these weapons to kill other people, and meanwhile it's killing ourselves. And it's hard to fathom the amount of poverty in this country. And I live in Silicon Valley, part of the richest area, and there's extreme poverty here. So every day we can imagine a world that's built on nonviolence instead of violence. That's all.
Thank you for pointing that out. And I think also, like for a lot of people, it's not like we say nuclear weapons. They do so much pain and are responsible for death, actually. And this is somehow. I mean, poverty is also a reason. So there's a lot of connection and that we may not see, but yes, thank you for pointing out that. So there's a question maybe that could be a question to Leona. Somebody asking to clarify what you mean by nuclear colonialism, and as I think it's a very important point, I would like to ask that to Leona.
This is a term that we use, which is referring to some writings by Winona LaDuke and Ward Churchill, which defines nuclear colonialism. I use this description to explain how the federal government continues colonization of our lands and our resources through the nuclear industry. And so the exploitation of uranium is part of it, as well as the weapons testing that the United States and other governments continue to oppress indigenous peoples around the world by doing uranium mining and impacting their resources. When there's contamination from uranium to water and our sacred places, I talked a lot about the health impacts, but this also has cultural impacts. A lot of places that have uranium are also sacred places, such as, for example, Mount Taylor is a place in New Mexico where there was a lot of mining, and it's been radioactively contaminated, as well as the Grand Canyon. Maybe some of you are familiar with the Grand Canyon and the Black Hills up in South Dakota. These are places that are sacred to the indigenous peoples and use these places not just for things like plants and medicines, but water. Water is extremely important and a sacred element, especially in the desert. We depend on water not only for life, but water is just like the earth, water, air, the land, and fire are our sacred elements. And so when they're impacted, this also hurts our people through the use of these places culturally, but we also believe some of our holy beings live in these places. And so it has metaphysical impacts not only to the human life, but to our Mother Earth and other holy beings that live in these places. And so nuclear colonialism, we see it as a form of exploitation to our Mother Earth, as well as impacting our genetics. We consider a friend of mine uses this term. It's a slow genocide of indigenous peoples. And so it's continuing to take not only our land and our resources, but killing our people, which was a tool of U.S. colonization in order to increase white settler colonialism as well as manifest destiny. Mining was a tool of colonization. And so it's not only a literal colonization in the physical world, but it also is impacting our culture and the future of our people and our practices, traditional ways. I hope that helps.
Yes, I think that clarified a lot. And for me also, that was very new that, I read about it, but I thought, that's why I started researching, and then I invited you to join this conversation, as I think it's a very, very important topic, and we know about this testing. And you mentioned before, especially the testing on U.S. land, but there's also in Russia done those tests mostly in the indigenous land. France did a test in Algeria, so it's very this colonialist politics. Marion, you want to add something?
Yeah, I even want to add, there is this term nuclear colonialism versus indigenous people, because nuclear testing has been done 100% worldwide on indigenous people's land, and uranium mining about 80%. But there's also now the term of nuclear colonialism towards the global south, like all these countries who are waiting for receiving new nuclear power plants. And for this, countries are making debts. I mean, the leaders, they're taking money for it, that they do these contracts with these nuclear corporations from the nuclear powers. But finally, it's the countries who end up in, it takes a huge delay. These plants are being built, but they will never be finished. And all the money then is being paid back to the big nuclear countries, the debts. And also these countries, like, for example, Kazakhstan, they are so poor right now, they are offering to take the nuclear waste from us rich industrialized countries. So this nuclear colonialism exists as well. I just wanted to add that.
Yes, very, very important point. So I would ask the panelists to go through the lasting questions, and maybe you feel like answering to, because I got a bit lost between them. So if you feel like you have an answer to one of them, you can do so. Yes, I mean, I think we're about to finish also, but yes, if someone wants to answer to one of those questions. Yes, and me asking again the question, where could we put, like, how could we connect this fighting against nuclear weapons, the production, the waste, and so on, with climate justice movement?
I can just offer some ideas there. With the fight against for climate, I notice in many places people are not including nuclear in this fight, and some people are even saying nuclear is good and that we should use nuclear energy. I know this is an issue when we talk about extraction of uranium. Uranium, the damage from uranium mining is it lasts forever, and the way they calculate the carbon footprint of nuclear is only at the nuclear power plant. And so all of the stages before nuclear energy development, from the exploration of uranium, the mining, the processing, the fuel fabrication, and each of those steps it occurs in different places, and those facilities and the transport are not calculated into the carbon footprint of nuclear. And so when they look at the carbon footprint, they're mostly looking at the power plant, and the exhaust that comes out, of course, is mostly steam. And so they say, oh, it's only water. It's safe. It's not CO2. You know, it's not the same kind of contamination as pollution as coal. However, they do not calculate the footprint of the waste storage. So after the power plant, the used fuel, the high-level radioactive waste, will be radioactive, some of the isotopes, for tens of thousands of years. And some people even say millions of years that this fuel will be radioactive. And so it's necessary to keep it safe and to have proper storage that must be monitored, because these are also the waste can also be used for weapons. And this is also an issue of terrorism. And so the carbon footprint of nuclear must include the entire production of uranium, as well as the storage of the waste afterwards, which will be beyond our lifetimes, and it's almost impossible to calculate. So we do not need to mine uranium, because if we use the uranium I don't agree with this, but if weapons can be downblended and dismantled and use the uranium for some nuclear power, there is no need to extract more uranium. So this is an issue I think a lot of the young people are not aware of. Our organization, we try to make the nuclear fight a little bit more interesting to young people. In the United States, the majority of people fighting nuclear are white men over the age of 60. And so it's one of the most difficult tasks to get young people interested in these things. But we are also fearful that some young people think nuclear is a solution to climate change, and it is not. And so this is one of the biggest fights. I know the flag behind me is "Don't Nuke the Climate." If you go to the website, don'tnuketheclimate.org, there is a report on nuclear and climate. I'll put it in the chat. But we must include uranium extraction as a fossil fuel. We must include this in the fight. And so here in the United States, the connection is not really there. And so maybe in Europe, I think a little bit more people are more aware of the issues of uranium and how to connect it with climate. But yeah, we need everybody's help and to include uranium and nuclear when we talk about climate justice.
Thank you, and also thank you for pointing out, that's also a very important point, that it's the young generation is totally missing in this movement, or not totally maybe, but in my eyes it's very unbalanced here. So I would like to I'll give the word to Marion in a second, but I would like to point out the last question. On the role of the IAEO. I don't know if in English we say it like that also. Yes, for those who feel like answering to it, that would be the next and maybe last one. But Marion, maybe you wanted to add something?
Actually, I want to talk about what the IAEA is about. The IAEA has a role actually to control when countries get nuclear power plants through the Non-Proliferation Treaty by nuclear power states the big powers, the nuclear weapons states. They have to control whether these countries are not secretly producing nuclear weapons. So they go there with the inspector teams, they do laboratory tests and so on. But the IAEO is biased. They are not really, neutral. And we had this situation quite a few times. For example, when the war took place against Iraq, and the war was actually based on the fear that Iraq would have nuclear weapons and would be a threat for the United States. The IAEA was asked, what do they believe on it, since Iraq was officially dismantling their nuclear weapon, or not nuclear weapons, everything what they had so far. And the IAEA was saying, oh, we actually don't know. Well, on the other side, we had the US Chief Inspector, Scott Ritter, who was speaking out, sorry, but Iraq, which came out later anyway in public, but Iraq has no nuclear weapons. And we have the same problems with Iran. So the IAEO has quite a difficult, work to do. That's the one thing. The other thing is there was a question about, I think, North Korea. Whether North Korea would be a threat, and we need mutual assured destruction because of that. North Korea had so little of it, even the carrier rockets, which didn't go very far. And so for North Korea, it would have been actually suicidal if they would have used it, and they only could have used it, which we don't want, but in the area. And they also demanded that the US takes away their nuclear weapons from South Korea. I'm glad and happy that this problem issue there stopped, because I don't want any attack in this region there. But we do have to have in mind that for some really, really tiny nuclear weapon states, which, it would be absolutely crazy to go against any big nuclear weapon state in the world. So I don't think we have to worry about that.
Okay, so I think we're finishing. Just the last, also to give Nadia a chance to speak out one more time, but very shortly. There's a question which I find very important. Can someone speak on the power of boycott and divestment? So there's this Don't Bank on the Bomb of which I can an ICANN campaign, I think you could say. So could you very shortly, Nadia, say what it is and what power it can have? And then we will finish by past. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I think that boycotts and divestment campaigns in a lot of different issues and areas, they proved very efficient and very where every person can act and has a role to play. And especially the Don't Bank on the Bomb is report, which is done by PAX and a Dutch NGO, that because the production needs a lot of money, so banks give credits to states like France and US, and that it publishes how much money and which bank is doing what, and that people that are having their accounts at these banks, that they sign protests. And it works perfectly, because in Austria we just had, for instance, a 5-day campaign, and it was done. That the only Austrian bank that gave this credit line, because we just needed, and maybe this also answers another question, if we talk to journalists and if we have connections, I guess everyone here has, but it's difficult to get these topics as long as they're like theoretical. But we found out that like an Austrian bank is giving a credit line, a free credit line to Airbus weapons production program. It was because a lot of people sent emails. And the bank did not want to be connected with it, and the TPNW now, the treaty now makes it quite prohibits also like banks and companies to invest in it. And I think this will be one of our greatest powers within the next years, to cut the funding for those programs. And this can really be done by the people, by a big movement, in like telling the banks and telling the pension funds that they do not want their money to invest it in that, and this definitely has an impact.
Thank you. That's at least something, yes, what we can do, and that's a good part to close also, to see that we have some power, very limited. Oh, but yes, that would be a way to start. And talk to our family who maybe has also their money on a bank, which we could bring it to another bank if there's money. So I want to thank. I don't know. I can't see the images anymore, but well, for the last minutes, it's okay. It's fine. I want to thank all of you for coming here, especially the four of you on the panel, but also I'm very, very happy that there were so many students there, so many questions, and that you stood, or at least around 50 people stood here till like this last half an hour extra. And I'll give the word to Manuel to close it, and then say thanks a lot.
So, also from my side, thank you for all the speakers. This was extremely interesting today, and it was really nice to have you here at our lecture. I just want to make advertisements for next week's session. So next week, we have Claudia Brunner, who's a peace scientist at the University of Klagenfurt, and we were very happy to have her here next week. And she will talk with us about epistemische Gewalt, and I'm very, very happy that she will come. And also I want to point out that the Studierende gegen Rüstungsforschung put up a chat in case that somebody still has the urge to discuss what we discussed today. And more than that, it's just thank you for everybody for being here, and hopefully we will see each other next week, and stay safe and have a nice evening.